Well, welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
I am so thrilled to have my sister from a different mister here, Miss Kim Botto, as I like to say. Oria Magato, here comes Kim Botto.
Yes.
Kim, if you have not had the privilege of hearing her speak or reading any of the material that she's put out, she is a consultant and professional when it comes to the area of meeting the needs of families that have unique abilities and kids with unique abilities. And she is great for connection and behavior issues. And she's just really poured her life into nurturing that community of people. And she is a wealth of information. So we're thrilled about that. Today, though, Marianne and I were talking off air, as we talk about kids with behavior issues, and we started to share some stories. And I said, wait a minute, let's just do this for the podcast, because we've all had those kids in those situations that you think, is this real life right now? Is this really happening in the Lord's house right now? I'll go ahead and start, Marianne, with my experience. I remember one time it was right at, I think we're having trunk or treat after church. So you kind of maybe know where this is going. It's Halloween, and this kid has a zombie mask on, and my pastor is preaching on stage, and this little dude looks like he had just come up out of the crypt right in the middle of second service and zombie walking down the middle aisle to the front of the stage where the pastor is in this very somber moment, and everybody in the auditorium is starting to key in on this kid. And fortunately, the pastor is trying to carry it, and to his, I don't know how he did it. He didn't even make mention of it. I probably would have just stopped and said, oh gosh, well, here it is. The dead walk again. There's a miracle in church, y'all. But yeah, it was kind of funny. The mom was mortified, of course.
I'm sure. Bless her heart. Yes, we've all had kids like that in ministry. And honestly, you never forget them because they really do shape the way you do ministry. We had a kid I will not ever forget, probably 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago. We had a kid in our ministry, Spencer Butters. Okay, just remember that name. I'm going to call him on the podcast.
Alone is awesome.
Spencer Butters. Okay, and Spencer Butters, something so unique about him is he was dressed differently every week. So Wednesday night, one week he'd come in his Wranglers and his belt buckle and his spurs, literal spurs to youth group. Okay, came in jingling.
Yeah.
And his accent and his language and his rhetoric would be very, very, would match how he would dress.
I love it. Every day is costume day in Spencer Butters' world.
Well, he was dealing with identity, and trying to figure out who he was. The next week he would come and he was into like twirling different batons.
Okay,
and
I was thinking like just spinning around dancing.
No, twirling batons one week. Okay. And then the next week he came in with the chain coming from his, wallet. Like the chain and the baggy jeans, and so every week it was just so cool to watch my husband, who was the youth pastor at the time, These are great words right here. Adapt and overcome. That is a
Yes.
good banner for ministry and for dealing with challenges, challenging students or challenging children in your ministry, which is what Kim Botto is going to totally line out for us. But really and truly, watching Chad adapt and overcome to meet this kid's needs week in and week out was something really special to watch.
So awesome. As somebody whose mind works in acronyms, I'm already like, the battle cry for youth ministry should be AO, like when things do not go right. AO, adapt
AO.
and overcome.
Adapt and
AO.
overcome. That's exactly
We
right.
may have just hit on something there, Marianne. Thanks
Yes.
to Chad, of course. Well, get out your pens or your note-taking devices, whatever that you use to make sure you've got that information to come back to later. Lean in as Kim Botto shares a wealth of wisdom for us, and we'll catch you guys on the other side of this interview.
Imagine families in your church thriving in their faith, blossoming with engagement. Kids who are curious and excited, parents who are inspired, and the unmistakable sound of joyous discipleship echoing through your halls. Yes, it's possible. Even in today's whirlwind of schedules and screens, your church can be a haven of family faith. But let's face it, reaching families today is tough. The changing landscape, the distractions, the packed calendars. That's exactly why there's D6 Home Point, a beacon of support for churches striving to strengthen family discipleship. Our strategic model is crafted to meet the needs of churches just like yours, all across the country. Join the hundreds of churches that have witnessed the beautiful transformation of families and the blooming of ministries with our proven approach. Our resources are as diverse as your congregation. From on-campus programs to dynamic online tools, we provide a treasure trove of customizable materials that blend seamlessly into the fabric of your unique church community. Don't let this opportunity pass your church by. To find out how D6 Home Point can revitalize family discipleship in your community, visit d6homepoint.com.
We are live from the D6 conference in Orlando, Florida, and I am joined by Miss Kim Botto. For the past several decades, Kim has led kids and student ministries at local churches while also leading initiatives around adoption and foster care. Kim's passion is creating fun and safe environments for all kids, regardless of their background, energy level, or unique needs. She also serves vulnerable kids and their families through community training and advocacy. And Kim, as previously stated off camera, I have personally
we had a great conversation.
People missed out, right?
It was great.
I have personally been looking forward to this conversation because I need it. I need this conversation. So thank you so much for being here
so
today.
Happy to be here. And you're not alone. So many churches have difficulty. They don't know what to do with the kids they don't know what to do with.
Right, exactly. So behavior issues in student and kids ministries, they're difficult to address.
Right.
And it's difficult to not sacrifice the opportunity for the majority to learn on behalf of the one or handful that can't really behave, can't make good decisions, right? Can you give us some practical tips and tricks as to how to address this issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say as adults, we are often more bothered by distracting behavior than the other students are. A lot of times they can tolerate much more than we can. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think sometimes I know I can get so focused on delivering the lesson for the day, and I think that's a win at the end of the day. But if there's a kid who's having a particularly hard time and the other students in there see us being empathetic towards that child or student, really connecting with them, not shaming them, then they're learning something from that interaction. And I know years ago we took a kid in high school that I knew quite well, and in his group were a couple foster kids, and they often took the conversation off what the topic was. But the student came back to me and said, you know what, I used to get so irritated with them about their behavior, and then I now know more about their background, and I can see why they're behaving in the way that they are. And then he actually became part of helping these young men be a part of the group and really feel like they fit in. So I think often it's not as much of a distraction as we think it is, and they can learn by just watching the way that we interact with young people who are having a hard time.
Yeah, one thing that we've been telling our teachers is the end goal is not to get through the lesson.
Great, that's good.
If
that's
those
good.
kids walk in and they know that they are loved and that they are safe and they're loved not just by their teacher but ultimately by the Lord.
That's right.
Then that's a goal accomplished, and that can be accomplished in many different ways. But I love that you said it's not just getting through the lesson, because that's affirming to what we're trying to do.
Yes,
so.
And we need to remind our volunteers that, because they want to, at the end of the day, win. And so we need to make it clear. So what you just articulated, Casey, that is a great way to communicate to them, this is what a win is.
Now, how, though, can we keep things from escalating? Like, we all have those moments where we're like, okay, things can go really south really quick after this moment. Is there a way that you can help us in keeping things from escalating, or once it has escalated, to de-escalate? What are some of those tools?
Well, we both have kids.
We do.
So we've seen that with our children. And what we have learned, I think you would agree, is that we can't control our kids.
Oh, man. I would love to sometimes.
We can't.
We can't.
But we can control our reactions and responses to their behavior. So I would say when we see something escalating, the first thing is that we need to be telling ourselves, what's our face communicating? We need to take some deep breaths. We need to stay calm. And just that in itself, especially going to a child or a student who is starting to get agitated and maybe dysregulated, speaking to them calmly, taking some deep breaths, often will help them calm down too. Now, sometimes they'll be so agitated that they might need to be removed from the room and go out in the hall and let them just, they have the fight and flight response. Maybe they need to flee for a little bit and just have some silence and just calm down on their own.
So we just moved to our church a year and a half ago or so. And so our boys were a part of the process of us getting there. We had them praying alongside us, recognizing that God has called you here for a purpose, just like he's called mom and dad for this ministry, right? And so after the first several weeks, we have a difficult crowd that comes on both Sundays and Wednesdays. And it has been so frustrating some of the times because we feel like we're sacrificing the big group for some of these. But at the same time, we've been able to look at our boys and say, at least they're in the building.
Yes.
That's win number one, right? They're there. We want them there. But would you say that there's ever a time that you feel like it's appropriate to say, we need you to not come back for a week, or we need you to take a break from coming to class because of the decisions that you're making? Is that ever appropriate?
Yes, it is. But I want to go back just where you were talking about just the behaviors that they're exhibiting. They're not just exhibiting them at church. They're doing it at school, at home, in the neighborhood. And so they are, I would imagine, being talked to in a negative way every place they go. So we still want to have boundaries. We have to have boundaries and expectations, but also we can be the place that calls out some of that really good stuff in them, because I believe no matter how they behave, they were created in God's image and there's good in them. For some of them, we have to dig a little harder, and we might even we might even need to pray that God reveals to us. So I'm having a really hard time seeing this. God, please show me. But maybe even it's their energy. They have incredible energy. Maybe they're not always using it for good, but call out the good in them, because they are probably not having that done anywhere else. As far as telling them to not come back, yes, sometimes for the safety of them and for the safety of others, that's necessary. But I think it's necessary far less often than we think that it is. I talk to a lot of churches, and 3 strikes you're out seems to be sort of popular. And that's not working with the young person, the kid, to learn how to cope, to learn how to settle down, to learn how to acclimate into this group. So, yes, there are occasions. I would say before that, try to dig beneath the behavior to see what is causing this disruptive behavior. Maybe they need a break. Maybe maybe they have sensory issues, and just the noise, when they come in and we think it's so much fun and exciting, it might actually just make them just behave in ways that are really difficult for us. If on occasion, rarely, you need to tell a kid, hey, because of what happened, like we had a kid who brought a weapon. So that student couldn't come back for a period of time. But we made sure that student knew that they were loved, that they were still a part of the group. Their small group leaders still communicated with them regularly and visited them in their home. We worked with the guardians of that student, setting some expectations and clear boundaries so that student could come back. He was searched when he came back, but it was because of what had happened before, to keep him safe and other people safe. So yeah, it may happen on occasion, and I would just make sure that if it does happen, that we're still staying in contact with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Are you concerned about your church's future? Will it serve another generation? The Bible says He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet we often only know how to connect to Abraham. Let D6 help you connect with each generation. Your kids and grandkids are counting on you. D6 comes from the principles of Deuteronomy 6 and helps what happens in church also happen at home. Curriculum you can trust. Discipleship that connects.
So we are talking about responding to challenging behavior, particularly in the church with kids. I'm personally benefiting from this conversation, so thank you so much. But the children in our church that we have, as previously discussed, there's just so many difficulties around it. And quite frankly, we don't know any of the parents. We have never met a parent. They are dropped off at our door. And so there's no one to go to say, hey, your child made this choice in our class, or we're having a behavioral issue. Can you help us with that? So how do we navigate that scenario when there's not an adult that we can go to say, hey, we're having this issue?
Well, sometimes, I know earlier we had talked about when there's not a parent that brings them, but if there's someone else that brings them, that actually is that's given us a little insight into their home life. Maybe they're not living with their parents. Maybe they're living with their grandparents. Maybe their parents aren't available on the weekend. Who knows? So just be curious and see what we can learn from that. In a situation that we talked about earlier, it's a man who is super passionate about getting kids to church, and he's just bringing kids to church.
Loading them up.
Yeah, and he
in.
doesn't even have a relationship
right.
with each of those kids. So in that case, because you don't have anybody to go to, and I would say even when you do, even when the parent is involved, it's great if you can find an occupational therapist or a teacher who works with kids who have behavioral issues. And for some of them, they might not want to come into the classroom every week, but you could just ask them to come in and observe and just say, hey, what are you noticing? Do you think there's something that's maybe triggering this behavior? Is there something that we could change about the environment to help this kid succeed in our environment? So even though you can't go to the parent, there are other resources that you can bring in to help you create a safe and fun environment.
Yeah.
For not just that kid, but for everybody.
Well, I love the fact that you talk about the teachers, because most of our volunteers feel ill-equipped, right, to be able to navigate a classroom where there are kids who are wanting to learn and those who are wanting attention. I mean, really is what it boils down to. And so how can we help those volunteers?
Well, I think first of all, it's changing our mindset in that They want attention because they want to be connected with somebody. There is a need that's not being met in their home or the other environments that they're in. They want to be connected. And a relationship with Jesus is all about connection. And so if we want them to know who Jesus is, a great way to start that is for us to form a relationship and a connection with them.
Yeah. I see emotion. I feel emotion because I feel like for the last year and a half, we have tried to love on these kids. And like I said, for the end goal to not be to get through our lesson, but that they would walk out of there and know that they're loved by us and by God. And that is a lot of times easier said than it is done just because of their behavior, but trying to see them through the lens of what they're facing at home, because most of them we don't know. What do you think about the idea of like pairing them with another adult in our church, or having someone assigned to, hey, if anyone is disruptive today, we'll send them to you? Is that a good idea, or does that give them what they want in kind of a negative case?
Well, in some cases, it gives them what they want in a very positive way. I think the age makes a difference, too. If you're talking about an elementary school kid, pairing them with a buddy, that has much less negative, it will generate less negative feelings from that kid. They think it's super cool that they have an adult, especially if it's a cool student that's hanging out with them. As far as we're talking about middle school and high school students, instead what you might want to do is, because if they have no special needs identified, to just have them, say, okay, you're a buddy, that will it could feel shameful to them, which we don't want to do that. Instead, you can have an adult come in and say, hey, can you hang out with Tom today? And not in a formal way, and not that he's, linked arms with them the whole time, but just kind of watch out for him. And if there are certain triggers, like if during the transition from the large group game to small group is always hard for this student, you can tell the adult, hey, and be particularly mindful during this time. Maybe during that time you go out and you take a walk in the hall, or you go get a cup of coffee. Well, not coffee. We don't want caffeine. Go get a glass of water.
They do not need any help in that area.
They do not need caffeine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like that idea. So we obviously want our students to learn while they're in that environment, but we also want them to be safe. What are some precautionary things that we can make sure are in place before kids even arrive to make sure no matter what their behavior, no matter what their background, everyone is going to be safe?
I think one of the most important things, and this is the hardest, is make sure that we have enough volunteers for the number.
Sorry, could you say that a little louder, please?
For the people in the back.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we need the right number of volunteers so that everybody is getting what they need. And if we have the bare minimum, what's going to happen is the volunteers who are there, as we talked earlier, they're going to get burnt out. They're going to be frustrated. And if I am frustrated with a kid's behavior, they know it. And that is not going to help them. Pam Leo, she's worked with kids forever, and she says, you don't make a kid do better by making them feel worse. And if I'm acting frustrated with them, that is not going to make them behave better. So making sure that you have enough volunteers, making sure that they have some skills and strategies in what to do when things are getting hard.
How do we do that? Do you have like a resource or a website or something you can push people to say, hey, this is an easy way to get your volunteers trained in that?
Yeah, there's a couple things. Trauma Free World, which was birthed from Back to Back, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. They have all kinds of short videos that talk about connection and different behavior issues that volunteers can watch those. Also, Robert Crosby wrote a book, Trauma-Informed Children's Ministry, that has very specific things like offering choices and sharing power with kids and students. It says it's for children's ministry, but is actually applicable to all ages.
All right. Well, Kim, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation, and I'm positive that both parents and church leaders listening today feel a little more equipped with this.
It's fun being with you. Thank you.
Well, I just absolutely loved Kim's take on a lot of things. And, we've heard her, give different variations of this interview in the past, and some new things stood out to me, Josh. One of the things that she said that, to be honest, I was extremely convicted by two things. They kind of go together. Number one, kids are learning from our empathy and interaction. And then you go down, she went down a little bit and explained that. Then she said, "What is your face communicating?"
Yes. What is your face communicating? She made the comment, as adults, we're more often bothered by the distracting behavior than the students are. And I know it. Like, I don't hide my emotions well. And if something is distracting me or gotten on my nerves, I just wear it on my face. And
Me
it's
too.
unfortunate because really, like you said, that the end goal is to not get through the lesson, but to have those kids walk in and walk out knowing that they're loved. And that's the goal. We can't control our kids and what they're going to do, but what we have control over is our reactions and how we respond to those different behaviors. And like you said, our kids are going to learn empathy from us. They're going
That's
to
right.
learn how to deal with those difficult situations, and they need to learn to AO from us.
That's right. That's exactly right. And too, I really loved that she said I really love this. It kind of gave me a vision even for our ministry of thinking about involving your teachers and your occupational therapists, and just look at your congregation and look at the gifting and the professions that some of the people in your church are engaged with or involved in, and enlist their help to come and observe and watch and help to train and equip your ministry volunteers with those specific types of kids in your ministry. I just loved that she brought that out. I mean, that really is leveraging the gifting of your volunteers, within your congregation. Just so
And
good.
that's just the way that God designed us to do, operating with our own gifts. Because let's be honest, as pastors and leaders, sometimes we want to think that we have all the gifts, and we don't.
That's right.
And we have people that may be sitting in the pews that want to be able to use their gift, and they may think there's not a place for that gift here, or
That's
they
right.
don't need me. And I think people need to be needed.
Yeah.
Um, we're all created in God's image, and there's good in all of us, just like these kids. And I like how she said sometimes you have to dig a little deeper. Like, I've learned, my wife always says this. She goes, "Those that are hardest to love usually
Mhm.
need love the most."
Yes.
And we used to actually
Right.
have that printed on every single classroom, because you have your volunteers going, "Oh gosh, that kid's here today and he's getting on my nerves." I'm like, that kid is a child of God, and he needs
Mhm.
to hear this more than probably most of these kids in here today. You
That's
know,
right.
um, what was it she
Yeah.
quoted? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on that same note, kind of as we wrap up this conversation today, you know, our prayer for all of our listeners as we close out this is, what is it that God wants to show you about himself through those kids in your ministry? That's kind of where I think we should kind of leave it and transition
Yeah.
into, next week. But, I just want to ask those of you that are listening right now and you're thinking about that difficult child in your ministry or those difficult students in your ministry, what is it? That's the question that we want to leave you with today is, what is it that God wants to show you about himself through them being in your ministry? Because God handpicked them for a very, very specific strategic purpose. And so we want to leave you with that. We're praying for you as you engage in ministry this week. We are super excited about our guest next week. He is a faithful friend of D6 family, Mr. Neil Gilliland. I cannot wait to talk about joy next week. Until then, we pray you have a fantastic week in ministry. We're praying for you, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.